My brother inherited Dad's 480K house. I got Mom's jewelry box, but when I opened it, I realized she'd left me a secret that would ruin him forever. The air in my father's study was thick with the scent of old paper, leather, and the cloying sweetness of the funeral lilies that still choked the entryway. It was a smell I had always associated with comfort, with Dad's quiet presence, but now it felt like a shroud. I sat on the edge of a stiff wingback chair, my black dress feeling too tight, my hands clenched in my lap. Across the polished mahogany desk sat Mr. Fields, our family's lawyer for as long as I could remember, his face a carefully constructed mask of professional sympathy. Beside me, my Aunt Carol shifted, her presence a small, warm anchor in the churning sea of my grief. And across from me, in Dad's own oversized leather chair, sat my brother, Jared. He was the picture of somber filial duty, his suit perfectly tailored, his expression carefully arranged into one of noble sorrow. I knew it was a lie. I could see the glint of something else in his eyes, something sharp and triumphant. Mr. Fields cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the funereal quiet. "As you know," he began, his voice a dry rustle of parchment, "we are here to execute the last will and testament of your father, Robert Miller. Robert was a client for over 30 years. A fine man. This is never an easy day." He adjusted his spectacles and picked up a sheaf of papers. "This will was drafted and signed on March 12th of this year, superseding all previous versions." My stomach tightened. March 12th? That was only 6 months ago. Dad had been unwell then, confused. Jared had been managing everything, his visits becoming more frequent, while mine, he claimed, were too upsetting for Dad's delicate state. I had fought him on it, but he was so convincing, so concerned, painting me as selfish for wanting to disturb our ailing father. "I'll proceed to the primary bequests," Mr. Fields continued, oblivious to the cold dread creeping up my spine. "To my beloved brother's wife, my sister-in-law, Carol Miller, I leave the sum of $25,000 in gratitude for her lifelong friendship and support." Aunt Carol reached over and squeezed my hand. A tear traced a path through her makeup. "Oh, Robert," she whispered. "To my son, Jared Miller," the lawyer read, and his voice seemed to take on a new weight, a new finality. "I bequeath my primary residence located at 45 Elm Street with all its furnishings and effects. Furthermore, I bequeath to him the entirety of my investment portfolio, held at sterling and price, and the remaining balance of all personal checking and savings accounts." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The house was worth nearly $500,000. The investment portfolio, I knew, was even more. It was everything. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at Jared, whose mask of sorrow had slipped just enough to reveal a flicker of pure, unadulterated victory. He had done it. He had actually done it. Mr. Fields coughed lightly, as if embarrassed by the sheer lopsidedness of it all. "And to my daughter, Chloe Miller." He paused, and for a wild, desperate second, I thought there must be a trust, another account, something he had missed. "I bequeath my late wife's jewelry box and its contents, in the hope that she will cherish it as her mother did, silent, not just quiet, but a deep, ringing void where my expectations, my sense of family, my very understanding of my father, had just been a jewelry box, my mother's jewelry box." It was a pretty thing, a lacquered box with mother-of-pearl inlay, but it was filled with costume jewelry, sentimental trinkets worth nothing. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a pittance, an insult, a public disinheritance designed to humiliate. Jared was the first to speak, his voice oozing a foul, synthetic sympathy. "Chloe, I had no idea," he lied, leaning forward with a show of concern. He wasn't himself at the end. You know that. He must have been confused." "You said he was sharp as a tack," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You told me he was making all his own decisions." "In some ways, yes," Jared backpedaled smoothly. "But financial matters, they overwhelmed him. Look, this is obviously a shock. I'll make it right. I'll give you $100,000 from my share. We're still family after all." The offer was the cruelest cut of all. It wasn't a gesture of love, it was a transaction. It was the victor magnanimously tossing a few coins to the vanquished. It cemented my status as a charity case, dependent on his goodwill. The rage, cold and sharp, finally pierced through the shock. "No," I said, my voice finding a sudden, surprising strength. I stood up, my legs trembling. "You will not give me anything." Aunt Carol stood with me, her hand a firm, supportive pressure on my back. "This is wrong, Jared," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "You know it's wrong. Robert would never have done this." Jared sighed, a put-upon sound of a reasonable man dealing with hysterical women. "He did do it, Aunt Carol. It's right there in black and white. I'm trying to be generous here. I'm trying to keep the peace." "I'll take the jewelry box," I said, my gaze locked on Mr. Fields, refusing to look at my brother. "Where is it?" "It's in the safe," the lawyer said, looking profoundly uncomfortable. He retrieved it and placed it on the desk. It was exactly as I remembered it from my childhood, a dark, gleaming rectangle that now seemed to mock me with its triviality. I picked it up. It felt heavier than it should, weighted with all the love it was supposed to represent and all the betrayal it now signified. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the study, out of the house I grew up in, leaving my brother sitting in our father's chair, the new king of a stolen kingdom. The front door clicked shut behind me, the sound of a final, brutal ending. The days that followed were a blur of gray. I stayed in my small apartment, the jewelry box sitting on my coffee table like a miniature coffin. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Looking at it felt like prodding a raw wound. Grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. But underneath the grief, the rage simmered. Jared's betrayal was a poison, seeping into every memory I had of my father. Had Dad really felt this way about me? Had I been such a disappointment that he would cast me aside so completely? Jared had called, of course. He left voicemails dripping with that same false concern. Chloe, please call me. We need to sort this out. I'm worried about you. He was worried about the optics. He was worried I would make a scene, tell the rest of the family the sordid details of his grand inheritance. Finally, a week after the funeral, I couldn't stand it anymore. The box was a silent accusation in the middle of my living room. I had to know. I had to see the worthless trinkets my father thought were the sum total of my worth. I sat on the floor and pulled it towards me. There was a small, tarnished silver lock on the front. I had no key. I remembered Mom keeping a collection of tiny, odd keys in a dish in her old writing desk. The desk was long gone, sold in an estate sale after she passed, but maybe a memory flickered, a secret. Mom showing me years ago when I was a teenager. For emergencies, she'd whispered with a wink, taping a tiny, ornate key to the underside of the top drawer of her desk. Jared had taken the desk. It was probably in the house right now. The thought of asking him for anything, let alone a key to my own meager inheritance, made me feel sick. I slumped back against the couch, defeated. Then another thought struck me. I was a child of the internet age. I found a paperclip, bent it, and after 10 minutes of clumsy, frustrating fiddling, I heard a faint click. The lock sprang open. I lifted the lid. The top tray was exactly as I remembered it. A string of fake pearls, a gaudy rhinestone brooch shaped like a peacock, a silver locket with a faded picture of her and Dad on their wedding day, earrings with missing backs. It was a collection of memories, not value. The scent of her perfume, faint and floral, rose from the velvet lining. A fresh wave of grief washed over me. I ran my fingers over the cheap jewels, my vision blurring with tears. This was it. This was all I had left of them. I almost closed it. I almost shoved it in the back of my closet to be forgotten, a painful monument to my father's final, inexplicable rejection. But as I went to lower the lid, my thumb brushed against the crimson velvet lining of the main compartment. It felt loose. There was a slight ripple in the fabric that shouldn't have been there. My curiosity, a flicker of my old self, stirred through the fog of my depression. I hooked a fingernail under the edge of the lining and pulled. It came away from the wood with a soft, tearing sound. Underneath, my world tilted on its axis. It wasn't wood. It was another thinner piece of wood, a false bottom. I pried it up with trembling fingers. And there, nestled in the hidden compartment, was a small bundle of papers tied with a ribbon, a silver USB flash drive, and a thick sealed envelope with my name, Chloe, written on it in my mother's elegant script. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was something else entirely. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. My hands shook so badly I could barely break the seal on the envelope. I unfolded the letter, several pages long, and began to read. My dearest Chloe, the letter began, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and the worst has happened. I am so sorry. I tried to protect you and your father, but my time ran out. There are things you need to know, things that will be hard to hear, but you must be strong. Your brother is not the man you think he is. I read on, my breath catching in my throat. Mom laid it all out with meticulous, heartbreaking clarity. Dad's dementia had started much earlier than Jared had let on nearly 2 years ago. It began with small things, forgetfulness, confusion over finances, but it progressed. Jared saw it not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. He systematically isolated Dad, convincing him that friends and family, including me, were trying to confuse him or take his money. He screened my calls, invented excuses for why Dad couldn't see me. The story about me upsetting him was a lie to keep me away. He had gained medical and financial power of attorney by taking Dad to a new lawyer, a friend of his, on one of Dad's good days, coaching him on what to say. Once he had control, he began the methodical process of draining the estate. Mom had discovered it by accident, finding a bank statement he tried to hide. She confronted him, and he had threatened her, telling her if she said a word, he would have her declared incompetent and put her in a home. He told her no one would believe her over him, the devoted, caregiving son. But my mother was a fighter. She started gathering evidence in secret. The papers in the box were copies of the original will, the one that split everything equally between us. There were bank statements she'd managed to get copies of, showing large, unexplained transfers from Dad's accounts into shell corporations Jared had set up. There was a copy of a devastating report from a geriatric specialist Mom had secretly paid to visit Dad, under the guise of being an old friend. The report was unequivocal. Robert Miller lacked the cognitive capacity to manage his own affairs, let alone understand complex legal documents like a new will. The USB drive, she wrote, was the most important thing. She had started carrying a small digital recorder in her pocket. She had recorded hours of conversations. Conversations with Dad, where his confusion was painfully obvious, and conversations with Jared, where his cruelty, his manipulation, his cold, calculating greed were on full display. The final paragraph of the letter shattered me. He is stealing your father's life, Chloe. His memory, his legacy, and your future. I was going to go to a lawyer, but then I got my own diagnosis, and it all happened so fast. This box was the only place I knew he would never look. He always thought my trinkets were worthless. Use this. Fight him. Don't let him get away with it. Your father loved you more than anything. Never, ever doubt that. This new will is not his wish. It is his sickness, twisted by his son's greed. Be brave, my love. All my love, Mom. I sat on the floor of my apartment, the letter clutched in my hand, and I wept. I wept for my father, a victim in his own home. I wept wept for my mother, who had fought a secret, lonely war to protect her family and lost. But as the tears subsided, something else took their place. The simmering rage I'd felt before was gone, replaced by a glacial sheet of pure, cold fury. The shock was gone, replaced by a terrible, unwavering certainty. Jared hadn't just influenced our father. He had erased him. He had stolen our family, our memories, and our future. And my mother, from beyond the grave, had just handed me the weapon to burn his entire world to the ground. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The first person I called was Aunt Carol. I read her my mother's letter over the phone, my voice breaking several times. There was a long silence on the other end of the line when I finished. A silence so profound I thought the call might have dropped. Then I heard her take a ragged breath. "That monster," she whispered, her voice thick with a mixture of horror and fury. "That absolute monster. I knew it. I knew something was wrong. The way he kept everyone away from Robert. The way he always had an excuse. Oh, your poor mother. To have carried that all by herself. She didn't want him to know she was onto him," I explained, wiping my eyes. "She was afraid of what he would do." "Of course she was," Carol said, her voice hardening. "Chloe, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to do what she asked," I said, a new resolve solidifying in my chest. "I'm going to fight him." "Good," she said without a moment's hesitation. "Good. You are not alone in this. I'm with you, 100%. Whatever you need. Money for a lawyer, a place to stay, anything. We are going to make him pay for what he did to your parents." Her immediate, unwavering support was like a steel brace around my fractured heart. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. It was for Mom. It was for Dad. Aunt Carol knew people. Her late husband had been a judge, and she still moved in legal circles. She told me she knew just the person, a lawyer who specialized in probate litigation and, more specifically, cases of elder abuse and undue influence. Her name was Evelyn Albright. 2 days later, I was sitting in a tastefully appointed office that was the polar opposite of Mr. Fields's dusty, old-world study. Evelyn Albright was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, commanding presence. She wore no makeup, and her graying hair was cut in a practical, no-nonsense style. She didn't offer platitudes or expressions of sympathy. She just listened. I laid it all out on her conference table. The jewelry box, Mom's letter, the copies of the bank statements, the specialist's report, and the small silver USB drive. I told her the whole story, from the will reading to the discovery in the false bottom. She listened intently, her gaze never wavering, her hands steepled under her chin. She read every page of my mother's letter, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, she was silent for a long time, studying the documents. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," she said finally, her voice even. "To have had the foresight and the courage to assemble all of this while under that kind of duress is extraordinary." "Is it enough?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Is it enough to fix this?" She looked me directly in the eye. "Chloe, what your brother has allegedly done is called undue influence. It means he used his position of power and trust to coerce your father, who lacked the mental capacity to resist, into changing his will for your brother's own benefit. What your mother has provided here is not just a smoking gun, it's a lit cannon. The letter provides the narrative, the documents provide the financial trail, the medical report establishes lack of capacity, and this," she said, tapping the USB drive with a perfectly manicured nail, "this is likely the nail in his coffin." A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy washed over me. "So we can win? We have a very, very strong case," she corrected me gently. "But I need to be clear with you. This will not be easy, and it will not be fast. Your brother will not simply roll over. He has a lot to lose. He will hire expensive lawyers. They will try to discredit you. They will drag this out, hoping to exhaust you emotionally and financially. They will file motions. They will request endless documents. They will try to bury us in paperwork." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "They will attack you personally. They will look into every corner of your life for anything they can use to paint you as unstable, greedy, or vindictive. Have you ever had any struggles with mental health, addiction, financial problems?" I thought of my sophomore year of college, a bad breakup that had sent me into a spiral of anxiety and depression. I'd seen a therapist for a year. I told her about it. "They will find that," she said, nodding. "They will request your medical records. They will try to portray you as the troubled daughter who is lashing out because she was cut out of the will for good reason. You need to be prepared for that. It will be ugly." "He already started," I said, thinking of Jared's voicemails. "He's telling the family I'm having some kind of breakdown." "Of course he is," Albright said. "That's page 1 of the playbook. Isolate the victim, discredit them, and control the narrative. We are going to take that narrative back." She outlined the plan. "First, we would file a petition to contest the will in probate court. This would freeze the estate, preventing Jared from selling the house or spending any more of the money. Second, we would file for discovery, a legal process to formally demand all of his financial records, phone records, and communications related to our father's care. Third, we would schedule depositions, where we would question him and anyone else involved under oath. This is a marathon, Chloe, not a sprint," she concluded. "It could take a year, maybe more, to get to a resolution. It will be the hardest thing you've ever done. Are you ready for that?" I looked at the jewelry box, at my mother's handwriting on the envelope. I thought of my father's confusion, his vulnerability. I thought of Jared sitting in that chair, smug and victorious. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I'm ready." The moment Jared was served with the lawsuit, my world erupted. He called me, and this time there was no pretense of concern. His voice was a low snarl of pure rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed hissed into the phone. A lawsuit? Are you insane? You're going to drag our family name through the mud, all because you didn't get what you wanted? This isn't about what I want, Jared, I said, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. Ms. Albright had coached me for this call. Stay calm, state facts, don't engage with the rage. This is about what Dad wanted. The will you had him sign is fraudulent. He let out a bark of derisive laughter. Fraudulent? Dad signed it in front of a lawyer. He was perfectly lucid. You're delusional. You're just like you were in college, a hysterical mess making up stories to get attention. There it was. The first shot fired, just as Albright had predicted. I have proof, Jared, I said calmly. You have nothing, he shouted. You have a box of cheap jewelry. Now you are going to drop this ridiculous, insulting lawsuit, or I swear to God, Chloe, I will make you regret it. I will drain every penny of the estate fighting you, and when I win, I will make sure everyone in this family knows exactly what a pathetic, greedy little creature you are. I'll see you in court, I said, and hung up before he could respond. My heart was pounding, but a strange sense of calm settled over me. He was scared. His threats were the desperate lashing out of a cornered animal. He was true to his word. The character assassination campaign began immediately. He called every aunt, uncle, and cousin. He spun a masterful tale of my emotional instability, my jealousy of his close relationship with Dad, my bitterness over being cut out for my own good. He painted himself as the long-suffering son, burdened with a difficult father and a grasping, mentally fragile sister, and some of them believed him. My cousin Mark, who had always hero-worshipped Jared, called to tell me I should be ashamed of myself. My uncle Steve, Dad's brother, called and awkwardly suggested I accept Jared's generous offer and let the whole thing go for the sake of family peace. The family began to split into factions. It was agonizing. People I had known my whole life were looking at me with suspicion and pity. I felt utterly alone, except for Aunt Carol, who became my fiercest defender, calling out the lies and shutting down the gossip wherever she found it. Jared's lawyers were as aggressive as he was. They filed a motion to have the case dismissed, claiming it was frivolous and vexatious. They buried us in paperwork, demanding every email I had ever sent my father, every text message, my complete financial history going back 10 years. And, as expected, they subpoenaed my college therapist's records. It was a clear and brutal attempt to intimidate me, to exhaust me into surrender. But they didn't know what I had. They didn't know about the box. Ms. Albright had advised we hold back our strongest evidence, the audio recordings, for as long as possible. We let them think their strategy was working. We let them believe this was a case of my word against his. The process of discovery was a slow, grinding ordeal. We spent weeks poring over the documents Jared was forced to produce. At first, his lawyers provided a mountain of disorganized, irrelevant papers, hoping we would miss the important details. But Ms. Albright hired a forensic accountant, a quiet, meticulous man named Mr. Chen, who was a virtuoso with numbers. I sat with him in a sterile conference room for days on end, fueled by coffee and a burning need for justice. Together, we traced the slow, systematic bleeding of my father's wealth. It was far worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just the house. Jared had been liquidating Dad's stock portfolio, piece by piece, for over a year. He had transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars into a series of LLCs with opaque names. He had used Dad's accounts to pay for his own lavish vacations, a new car, and even a down payment on a condo for his girlfriend. The total amount he had stolen was staggering, well over $1 million. He was clever, Mr. Chen noted, pointing to a complex series of transfers. He moved the money through multiple accounts to obscure the trail, but he wasn't as clever as he thought. He got sloppy here and here. The dates on these transfers correspond directly with the dates your father's doctor noted significant cognitive decline. Every new discovery was a fresh stab of pain, another confirmation of the depth of his depravity, but it was also another brick in the wall of our case. While the financial investigation was proceeding, we prepared for the depositions. The first was Jared himself. We met in a neutral conference room at a court reporter's office. Jared walked in with his lawyer, looking tanned and confident. He nodded curtly at me, refusing to make eye contact. Ms. Albright began the questioning calmly, starting with his relationship with our father. Jared painted a beautiful picture of a devoted son. He spoke of Dad's clarity, his strong will, his firm opinions about his finances. So, on March 12th of last year, the day the new will was signed, you would say your father was of sound mind and body? Albright asked. Absolutely, Jared said without hesitation. He was sharp as a tack. He knew exactly what he was doing. Albright made a small note. And he understood the full extent of his assets, the value of the house, the specifics of his investment portfolio? Of course, Jared said, a touch of arrogance creeping into his voice. We had discussed it many times. He wanted me to have it. He was worried, Chloe, he said, finally looking at me with a pained expression. Wasn't responsible enough to manage it. For 4 hours, Albright led him through his story, letting him build his narrative, letting him commit his lies to the sworn record. She asked about the large financial transfers. He had a story for everything. They were investments Dad wanted him to make. They were gifts Dad had insisted he take. He was a master of plausible deniability. He left that day looking smug, convinced he had won. The next deposition was the key. It was the in-home caregiver Jared had hired for Dad in the last year, a man named Luis. He was nervous, his hands fidgeting in his lap. Jared's lawyer was present, frequently objecting, but Albright was patient and methodical. She started by establishing a rapport with Luis, asking about his work, his family. Then she moved to my father. father. Tell me about Mr. Miller's daily routine, Luis. Luis described a routine that was heavily managed by Jared. He described Dad's good days and bad days. On the bad days, Albright asked gently, what was he like? Luis hesitated, glancing at Jared's lawyer. He would be confused, he admitted quietly. He would sometimes forget my name, or think his wife was still alive. Did you ever mention this confusion to Jared? Yes, of course. And what was his response? He said it was normal for old people. He said not to make a big deal of it. Albright then steered the conversation to the day the will was signed. Do you remember that day, Luis? I think so. A lawyer came to the house. And what was Mr. Miller's state of mind that day? It was not a good day, Luis said, his voice dropping. He was very agitated in the morning. Jared spent about an hour with him in his study before the lawyer arrived. What were they doing? I don't know for sure, but I heard Jared's voice. He was speaking loudly, like he was coaching him, telling him what to say. You just need to say this, Dad. Just sign here, Dad. Jared's lawyer immediately objected, but the damage was done. Luis had cracked. After the deposition, he pulled Ms. Albright aside in the hallway, his eyes full of guilt. He confessed that Jared had paid him a large bonus in cash every month to report only positive things to Dad's doctors and to downplay any signs of his dementia. He was afraid of Jared, but he was more afraid of committing perjury. He agreed to testify to that in court. It was a major breakthrough, a crack in the wall of lies Jared had so carefully constructed. The last piece of the puzzle was the USB drive. Listening to the recordings was the most painful part of the entire process. I had to do it with my therapist present. We sat in her quiet office as I put in the earbuds and pressed play. The first files were of my mother and father. Her voice was gentle, patient. His was thin, reedy, and often confused. Robert, darling, Mom's voice said. It's Tuesday. Chloe isn't coming today. She's coming on Saturday. Saturday? Dad's voice answered, a thread of panic in it. Jared said she wasn't coming anymore. He said she was angry with me. No, darling, that's not true, Mom soothed. Jared must be mistaken. My stomach twisted. He had been actively poisoning my father against me. Then I listened to the recordings of Mom and Jared. They were chilling. You can't keep doing this, Mom's voice said, firm but strained. Taking his money. It's theft, Jared. It's my money. Jared's voice, cold and flat, replied, or it will be soon enough. I'm the one here, taking care of him. I'm the one putting in the work. I deserve it. He's just a confused old man who signs what I put in front of him. What are you going to do, Mom? Tell someone? They'll think you're the one who's gone senile. In another recording, he was even more explicit. Chloe doesn't need it. She'd just waste it. I'm protecting the family legacy. This is what's best for everyone, and you will not get in my way. I took off the headphones, shaking. It was a villain's monologue, a confession delivered with absolute arrogance, a complete certainty that he was untouchable. My therapist handed me a glass of water. This is it, I whispered. This is everything. The pain of hearing it was immense, but it was eclipsed by a sense of grim purpose. He had said it himself. He had confessed. Now, all I had to do was make sure a judge heard it too. The trial date was set for a cold Tuesday in November, nearly 18 months after I first opened the jewelry box. Walking into the courthouse felt surreal. The past year and a half had been a grueling war of attrition. My savings were gone, depleted by legal fees that Aunt Carol had generously helped me cover. My relationships with half my family were in tatters. I had been forced to relive my most painful memories in depositions and affidavits, but I had made it. The courtroom was a cavern of polished wood and solemn silence. Jared sat at the opposing table with his two expensive-looking lawyers. He looked thinner, more strained than he had at the deposition, but he still projected an air of indignant confidence. He glanced at me once, a look of pure venom in his eyes, before turning away to confer with his counsel. Aunt Carol sat in the front row behind me, a silent, unwavering pillar of support. The first 2 days were a blur of legal arguments and procedural motions. Then, it was time for me to take the stand. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked to the witness box and swore the oath. Ms. Albright began her questioning, her voice calm and steady, guiding me through my story. I spoke about my relationship with my father, the suddenness of his decline, and Jared's campaign to isolate him. I recounted the day of the will reading and the discovery inside the jewelry box. I could feel the jury listening, their faces a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. Then came the cross-examination. Jared's lead attorney, a man with a silver mane and a predatory smile, approached the witness stand. His name was Mr. Davenport. Miss Miller, he began, his voice smooth as silk. You were deeply disappointed by your father's will, weren't you? I was hurt and confused, I corrected him. You stood to inherit millions in a previous version of the will, correct? But in this final version, you received only a box of trinkets. That must have been quite a financial blow. This isn't about the money, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Oh, I think it is, he purred. Let's talk about your financial situation, Miss Miller. You have a significant amount of student loan debt, don't you? A car payment? Credit card bills? He listed my debts with relish, making me sound like a desperate spendthrift. I live within my means, I said, my cheeks burning. Of course. Let's talk about your time in college. He then proceeded to dissect my period of anxiety and depression, twisting my therapy sessions into evidence of a long-standing emotional instability. He tried to paint me as a fragile, unreliable narrator, someone prone to fantasies and dramatic accusations when she didn't get her way. It was brutal. It was humiliating. Every insecurity I had was laid bare and twisted into a weapon against me. I could feel my composure starting to crack. I looked over at Ms. Albright, who gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. I remembered what my therapist had told me. Breathe. Plant your feet on the floor. floor. Focus on the facts. I took a deep breath. I sought help for a difficult period in my life, I said, my voice suddenly firm and clear. It taught me how to handle stress and to be resilient. It has nothing to do with what my brother did to my father. Davenport seemed momentarily thrown by my shift in tone, but he pressed on, trying to poke holes in my story. By the time he was done, I was emotionally exhausted, but I hadn't broken. The following days were when our case truly unfolded. Ms. Albright called Mr. Chen, the forensic accountant, to the stand. With charts and graphs, he walked the jury through the complex web of financial transactions, showing them exactly how Jared had siphoned over $1 million from my father's accounts. It was dry, factual, and utterly damning. Next came Dad's caregiver, Luis. He was visibly terrified, but he told the truth. He described Dad's confusion, Jared's dismissiveness, and the coaching session he overheard on the day the will was signed. He told the court about the cash bonuses Jared paid him to lie. Davenport tried to discredit him on cross-examination, painting him as a disgruntled employee, but his testimony was powerful and sincere. Aunt Carol testified about the changes she saw in my father and how Jared had systematically cut him off from his family. A neurologist, hired as an expert witness, reviewed Dad's medical records, including the secret report from Mom, and testified that, in his professional opinion, my father had lacked the testamentary capacity to execute a new will. Throughout it all, Jared sat at his table, his mask of confidence beginning to slip. He looked pale, his jaw clenched. He knew what was coming. The climax of the trial came on the final day of testimony. Ms. Albright stood before the judge. "Your Honor," she said, "we would like to play for the court several audio recordings recovered from a device belonging to the decedent's late wife." Davenport leaped to his feet. "Objection! We have no way of verifying the authenticity of these recordings. They could be doctored. We have had them authenticated by a forensic audio expert who is prepared to testify," Ms. Albright countered smoothly. "The recordings were made legally under this state's one-party consent law." The judge overruled the objection. A clerk set up the audio equipment. The courtroom fell silent. Ms. Albright pressed play. First, the jury heard my father's thin, confused voice, believing I was angry with him. Then, they heard my mother confronting Jared. And then came the final, devastating recording. Jared's voice, clear and cold, filled the courtroom. "He's just a confused old man who signs what I put in front of him. What are you gonna do, Mom? Tell someone? They'll think you're the one who's gone senile." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. I looked at the jury. Their faces were masks of shock and disgust. I looked at Jared. All the color had drained from his face. He was staring at the speakers as if he'd seen a ghost. The voice of his own arrogance, his own cruelty, had come back to condemn him. He had been so sure of himself, so certain of his own cleverness, that he had confessed his entire crime to the one person who was meticulously documenting his every move. When the recording finished, the silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a man's life, his reputation, and his freedom imploding. Ms. Albright stood. "The petitioner rests, Your Honor." The verdict came 2 days later. The judge invalidated the will of March 12th, ruling that it was the product of undue influence and that my father had lacked the capacity to sign it. The court reinstated the previous will, the one that split the estate equally between Jared and me. Furthermore, the judge announced he was referring the entirety of the case file, including the financial audits and the audio recordings, to the district attorney's office for a criminal investigation into felony financial elder abuse. It was a total victory. We had won on every single count. Aunt Carol hugged me, sobbing with relief. Ms. Albright shook my hand, a rare, genuine smile on her face. I felt a surge of triumph, a fierce, burning vindication for my mother, for my father, for myself. But as I watched them lead a stunned, ashen-faced Jared out of a side door, the triumph felt strangely hollow. Justice had been served, but it didn't feel like a celebration. My brother was a criminal. My father's last years had been a torment. My mother had died carrying a terrible secret burden. Winning the case didn't erase any of that. It just exposed the rot that had been festering at the heart of my family for years. The legal battle was over, but the work of healing, I knew, was a much longer, quieter journey that was only just beginning. In the weeks that followed the verdict, the world slowly shifted from the stark black and white of the courtroom back to shades of gray. The criminal case against Jared began its slow crawl through a different, more ominous legal system. He was out on bail, but his assets were frozen, and the specter of a prison sentence loomed over him. The relatives who had sided with him were suddenly, conspicuously silent. A few sent tentative, awkward text messages, clumsy attempts at reconciliation that I ignored. Their support had been conditional, and I was no longer interested in meeting their conditions. My inheritance, now legally mine, felt like blood money. The house on Elm Street, the place I had grown up, was no longer a home. It was a crime scene, tainted with the memory of my father's captivity and my brother's greed. I couldn't bear to set foot in it again. With Ms. Albright's help, I arranged for an estate company to clear it out. I asked them to save only my parents' photo albums and a few specific pieces of furniture from my childhood room. The rest, including the oversized leather chair Jared had claimed as his throne, was to be sold. We put the house on the market and it sold quickly. Watching the proceeds of the sale, my half transfer into my bank account, was a strange, anticlimactic moment. It was a life-changing amount of money, but it brought no joy. It was restitution, not a prize. It was the tangible result of immeasurable loss. I knew I couldn't stay in the same city. Every street corner held a memory, and too many of them were now poisoned. I needed a clean slate. I used a portion of the money to buy a small house in a quiet coastal town 3 states away, a place where no one knew my name or my story. It was modest, with a small yard that was mostly weeds and a porch that needed a fresh coat of paint. It was perfect. Rebuilding was a practical, step-by-step process. I found a new therapist, someone to help me unpack the complex trauma of the betrayal and the trial. We talked about the imperfect nature of justice. Even if Jared went to prison for years, it wouldn't bring my parents back. It wouldn't restore my father's stolen dignity or my mother's stolen peace. Justice was a consequence, not a cure. The cure, my therapist told me, was in learning to live with the scars, in building a new life where I was the one in control. I established firm, permanent boundaries. I changed my phone number. I sent one final group email to the family members who had enabled Jared or turned against me. It was short and direct. The court has rendered its verdict on the matter of my father's estate. I am now moving on with my life and need to focus on my own healing. I wish you all well, but I am asking that you do not contact me again. I knew it was harsh, but it was a necessary act of self-preservation. My family, as I had known it, was gone. My real family now consisted of Aunt Carol, who called me every Sunday, her voice a warm, steady presence in my new, quiet life. The days began to take on a new rhythm. I worked in my garden, pulling up the weeds and planting new flowers. I painted the porch. I adopted a rescue dog, a scruffy terrier mix who followed me everywhere. I found a part-time job at a local library, surrounded by the quiet comfort of books. The anger, which had been my fuel for so long, slowly began to recede, leaving behind a deep, settled grief, but also something else: peace. One cool autumn afternoon, about a year after the trial, I was unpacking the last box of things from my old life. Inside was my mother's jewelry box. I hadn't opened it since that first fateful day. I ran my hand over the smooth, lacquered lid with its mother-of-pearl inlay. It no longer felt like a symbol of insult or betrayal. It was a lifeline, a legacy of a different kind. I opened it. The top tray was still filled with her costume jewelry. I picked up the gaudy peacock brooch and smiled. I remembered her wearing it to a school play of mine when I was 10. I picked up the silver locket and looked at the tiny, smiling faces of my parents on their wedding day, young and full of hope, before their lives were complicated by children, illness, and betrayal. This box and its contents, the will had said. Jared had thought the contents were the cheap jewels. He was wrong. The true contents were the truth. The contents were my mother's fierce, protective love. The contents were my own resilience, my own future, bought at a terrible price. I closed the box, but I didn't put it away. I placed it on the mantelpiece in my new living room, not as a painful reminder, but as a testament to the fact that sometimes the most valuable things are hidden, waiting in the quiet dark for you to be strong enough to find them. I looked out the window at my small, flourishing garden, my dog asleep in a patch of sun on the floor. The scars were there, and they would always be a part of me. But for the first time in a very long time, I felt something like hope. I was free. I was home.